Hello everyone. So I really want to grow this channel a little bit more, and I know one way to do that is for me to create some epic clickbait videos. And when it comes to video games, I know there is no better video for clickbait than just making tier lists. So I've been playing around with SR and R characters for a while now, and I kind of feel like making a tier list for them. Now I'm going to keep my tier list relatively simple in that I'm not going to have that many tiers. I never really understood people who make tier lists and then they end up having like 15 tiers. And then like you have those Langrisser tier lists that have like 5 levels of S's. I know people like to differentiate between like the really good characters and just the really good characters, but sometimes it just drives me crazy. So me personally, I'm only going to have 4 tiers here, and I think they're going to be pretty simple, but I'll explain them real quick. For each character, I'm going to give a PvP and a PvE ranking because obviously there's a lot of characters who are really good at one and maybe not so good at the other. And then I have one last column which just says Divine Shard Priority. This is going to be a column pretty much only for collab characters because I personally don't think you should ever use Divine Shards on the gacha SR characters. If you play the game long enough, you will probably get these guys to 6 stars, but that's different for collab characters. The only thing you can ever do is to sit around and hope they rerun the collab, which might take a year or even more. Anyway, for each of these I have rank S through C. So for me, an S rank unit for PvP, it's a unit that's genuinely good in that they're actually still relevant in PvP. It's not just that you can use them and you can make them work well, it's that they are genuinely a huge threat in PvP and they will get banned early. There's probably not going to be a lot of characters that fall into this from the SRs, but I can already think of one at least. For S rank PvE, there's going to be way more characters that I can think of. Generally speaking, I'm going to place characters in this rank if either they are just really good, or they're just like someone you have to raise for a specific fight in the game, or they have some very unique role that you're pretty much going to be forced to raise them for some reason, or if you don't, you're really making it harder on yourself. And S rank for Divine Shard is that I would only place a character in this tier if I think you should shard them before everyone else. This tier might end up actually being empty for Divine Shards because of how I'm setting the standard here, but you know, I guess I'll see. Now to me, an A rank SR PvP character is going to be someone that is sometimes a threat and will sometimes get banned depending on how the rest of your team is looking. And they're just generally a pretty good unit, but they do have some big flaws that cause them to not be seen in PvP as often anymore. For PvE, I think A rank is just a character who is good at their role, or they have a very specific niche function that makes them valuable, but not a niche that is so important that you kind of have to raise them. And yeah, I think you'll see what I mean when I start ranking the characters, because I can think of some niche functions from characters that are actually really important for PvE, and you end up having to raise them. And this rank is basically just going to be the recommended people to shard for the Divine Shards. Characters you'll get a lot out of if you shard them, basically. B rank I think is pretty straightforward, is that these are like generally usable or even good units, but they are pretty generic at their role, and because of that they're pretty much completely replaceable and there's really no reason to be using them unless you like them. So same thing with the shards, like, you know, it might be like a really generic DPS or something, and you can shard them if you like them and for the Divine Shards, but otherwise it's like there's really no particular reason to use them. The bottom tier here is going to be C tier, and basically the only reason I'm going to put anybody in C tier is if I think they are a genuinely bad unit not worth using. I don't think this is actually going to be that many units. Well, for PvP maybe this will be quite a few actually. But for PvE, I don't think this will be a lot of units because most characters can work okay in PvE, but there will probably be a couple down here in C. I'm also ranking the R characters because I might as well do it. You know, I think a lot of the R characters are going to find themselves in C tier, but I guess we'll see. So without further ado, let's just get started. So first we have Aaron. I remember in the early days of the game, some people considered Aaron to be actually a really strong unit, and in fact a lot of the R characters were pretty good at launch. But here's the fundamental problem with R characters. It's that I feel like they're designed very poorly, at least at this point in the game, because they require almost just as many materials to upgrade as SR and SSR characters. So it's like, there's really no reason to be investing those kinds of resources into them, especially as a newer player nowadays. So they've basically completely lost any point to raising them unless they have something very special to offer. And this is why I say like most of the art characters will probably find themselves in C tier for my list here. If you want to protest, you can say so in the comments, but for now I'm just going to put Eren in C tier for both PvE and PvP. I just don't see any reason to be using the guy. There are plenty of really strong SR tanks at this point, and Eren's really not that impressive even at 6 stars. So next we have Alfred. Alfred does have a very interesting utility skill in Beach Party. There aren't any other SSR characters or any other character in the game that can do that. But one problem is that they just haven't added that many aquatic units to the game, and there's even fewer relevant aquatic units in PvP especially. Alfred himself is kind of an all-rounder, I would say. Like, he can do pretty good damage. He's fairly tanky since he's aquatic, and he also has the ability to run really far once he has his water up. But he definitely would not really register on anybody's radar nowadays for PvP. There was a short span of time where he was able to use his 3C to like one-shot Landius and stuff, but that's not really going to happen anymore, obviously. Power creep has not been nice to Alfred and units like him, who just have relatively generic DPS kits and then plus like one utility skill that's kind of interesting. And like I said, there's really not that many aquatic units for him to give Beach Party to, so it's not as useful as it might look at first. For PvE, some of you have seen me use Alfred, and yeah, there's a couple unique situations where he's pretty good. But unless you're like me and you're just doing a lot of self-imposed challenges, I don't think there's a whole lot of reason to be raising Alfred. If you have any decent SSR started up, for the most part, he's not really going to do anything particularly impressive for you. So for that reason, I'm just going to put him in B rank for both PvP and PvE. He's okay, he does okay damage, and getting on water actually isn't a problem for him anymore because of his 3C and his unique. But obviously most people would rather just put that investment into a unit, an actual SSR unit or something. Okay, next we have Almeda, and since I'm talking about Almeda, I'm actually going to bundle her together with Matthew real quick, because I'm going to place them both in S rank for PvE. And the reason for this isn't necessarily because of what they specifically do in PvE fights, but it's for the simple fact that they are basically always bonus units in Secret Realm events. If you are a new player, or even if you're not a new player, even if you're like a mid-game player and you don't have that many diverse sets of units built up yet, you get so much out of building Almeda and Matthew because they will always be good for farming events. And sure, you can just leave them at level 5 and then deploy them and piss off all your teammates, but generally speaking, I think it's going to make things a lot easier for you if you actually raise them. And all that aside, they're actually pretty good units in PvE anyway. Almeda, obviously, like, she's pretty good for Phoenix because she will debuff the Phoenix throughout the entire fight. She can debuff the Thunder Dragon if you position in a specific way. Almeda is also like a Mythical Realm healer, which you might be lacking in case you need to do a Mythical Realm challenge. Matthew, of course, just has a pretty nice PvE loadout because Attack Command, Air Slash, and of course the Protagonist Faction buff. They're also like a worthy investment for a new player because they're going to consistently get stronger for you just by playing through the game, rather than you hoping that the gacha is going to give out the SR shards you need. They're going to reach 6 stars for you as long as you progress the game, so I can think of very few reasons to just not raise them. They are usually really high return on investment. As for PvP, I place them both in B rank. I'm actually a bit tempted to drop Almeda all the way down to C rank here, because even though Matthew can still offer the Protagonist Faction buff as well as Sprint, which is actually very important nowadays, Almeda really doesn't offer anything anymore that is unique from other healers. She does have like the map-wide heal, which is nice, but just usually isn't enough for you to survive anything important. Her half debuff, half healer role just doesn't work that well anymore because Rosenseal exists now. Sure, you can ban Rosenseal, but if you do that, you're probably facing off against a more aggressive team instead, and Almeda can't do anything against those. Power creep has just given Almeda a really hard time. She used to be able to do a couple things in PvP, and I wouldn't know because I actually used Almeda in PvP. At this point, I kind of keep her in my box mostly as a joke, more so than me ever actually using her for real. But regardless, I think both of them are still worth raising just for their PvE function. And of course, we know that an SP is coming for Matthew eventually, and I would not be surprised if we see an SP Almeda at some point as well. So they do still have potential to be pretty good. Next we have Altina, who was just screwed over pretty bad by the developers. They gave her such a bad kit. She does have a few unique things going for her, like her flying movements, forward movement. Being a flyer means she can use last rites. She has some okay skills, and she has reinforcements, which lets her have some sustainability. But you know, that's really reaching for good things to say about Altina. Her talent is almost impossible to use effectively in PvP. Her form move is completely useless nowadays because, you know, in a tank push you don't care that much, and in any sort of rush she is definitely like at least below average, if not just straight up terrible movement. And even in PvE, like, she really doesn't offer anything particularly special. The defense debuff and buff are nice, and they are a unique debuff separate from like mass protect and stuff, so it does have some use there. But generally speaking, because Altina herself doesn't have that good of output, it ends up being kind of a wash in terms of how much stronger it makes your entire team. The only reason you might see me use her sometimes is because if I do meteor strike challenges, she is very uniquely placed in that faction. And meteor strike is pretty, like, they're starving for SR characters, so Altina is perfectly usable there. So I'm going to put Altina in C rank for PvP, and like very borderline I'll put her in B rank for PvE. I mean, she's usable and she does have like one or two things that are unique to her, but I mean, she's on the borderline of just being just really bad all around. Angelica is a pretty interesting case. When Angelica first came out, like, I think people pretty much universally believed that she was terrible. She was really gimmicky. She had a summon that was just completely useless. She healed herself, which was kind of cool, but wasn't that useful, and she did like no damage herself because she had no int or damage boost in her talent. She did have the time faction buff, and she could blow up people's soldiers, so she was well known for having like a joke combo with Sumire. So if you blow up Sumire's soldiers, you can run Sumire forward and then just like do a ton of damage. That was kind of known as the original Angelica combo. Since then, Zalon's actually been pretty nice to her. They gave her some really good utility skills like mass heal, the reconvict skill, and like even her 3C. Like, you know, I made fun of the 3C for being like really gimmicky, but it's still a nice heal to have. And she just has a really nice kit with very unique utility to offer. The time faction buff isn't as valuable as it used to be because time faction hasn't gotten that many characters that are so important that you would actually need to run a time faction buff. But yeah, as far as SRs go, Angelica is actually one of the ones that has steadily improved quite a bit over time as far as PvP is concerned. And one other thing is that she can be pretty annoying to kill if she uses like Crystal Warlocks, plus the fact that she'll heal her soldiers every turn. So she's not like a PvP superstar or anything, but I'm actually going to go ahead and put her in A tier for PvP. I know that might surprise some people, but when it comes to SRs, like, you can't expect too much out of them. And I think like Angelica is better off than like a lot of SRs as far as PvP goes. Like, there are some niche roles that she can have, and some boxes will even like really welcome Angelica. So she's like done pretty good for herself. For PvE, I'm putting her in C rank. Like, she's still bad at PvE. Anna C rank, like, I don't think I need to explain that too much. She has like a terrible talent, and she's pretty much just a worse Chris. The random buffs can be funny, but of course you get way more using Chris, and since Chris just happens to be the next character we're talking about anyway, so Chris. I'm placing Chris at A rank for PvE. The reason I'm not putting her at S rank because like I don't think she's like necessary for anything. She is definitely like really strong in PvE, and she can be very valuable, and her value goes up even higher if you get her unique, but I think most people aren't going to spend the controllers for that. She's a really good demon killer. She fills multiple roles at once. She's buffed by like some pretty common and good PvE factions, and she can be very good in Hugin and Munin as well as a support unit, but generally speaking I don't think there's any fights where you have to use Chris, so for that reason, like, I don't see any reason to put her in an S tier. For PvP, I'm gonna place her in B. Like, yeah, it can be funny when Chris gives people a bunch of Tenyo Breezes, and she does have a very strong support kit, but she can't really do everything she wants to do at once. She has very little movement, and in general, she's just like a wild card unit that sometimes makes you win matches, and sometimes she just does nothing. I will say that I still think Chris is like one of the top voted units by a lot of the player base to get an SP, so I am fully expecting an SP Chris in the future. And I mean, I can think of a lot of ways to make SP Chris good, but ultimately speculation in that direction I think can be fun, but ultimately kind of pointless because as we saw with Lewin, they can take like a unit that was basically unusable in PvP and make them useful. So, you know, the base kit is good, but, you know, whether or not she gets an SP, we'll just have to wait and see. Dios does a lot of debuffs, like he can like lower defense a lot, and like I said with Aaron, like one of the problems with our characters is that even if they have some unique things to offer, it's just like it's not worth investing the resources into them at all. I'm placing Dios in C rank like most R characters. Plus, every time I see Dios's portrait now, I just think of Loomis, and we all know that's a bad thing. Next we got Egbert, and Egbert is great. I'm placing him in A tier for both PvP and PvE. I'm actually tempted in placing him in S tier for PvP. I think he just misses the mark because I don't think Egbert offers anything specifically unique to boxes. There's a fair number of teleporters in the game now, and there are plenty of good AoE characters that can do fixed damage as well. But Egbert, you can't really go wrong with him. Like, if you're a newer player, then I think Egbert should definitely take up a slot in your Apex box as you're getting into it. And as for PvE, it's sort of the same thing. Like, Egbert is really good in PvE. Like, fixed damage is always nice, especially on like those really high level challenges where they have really inflated stats. Or at least the ones where you have to fight a bunch of mooks. He's not so good at fighting bosses. But he can do fixed damage, and he can also like distract enemies with his summon. He's overall just a pretty good unit to have around. Like I said, I'm tempted to put Egbert in S rank, but I think he just slightly misses the mark here. Emerick, on the other hand, I think very comfortably I would put him at S tier for PvE. I don't think I really need to explain it too much. Like, Emerick offers something in PvE that no other unit in the game does. And to this day, he still is like a really good way to cheese a number of final challenges or just make them a lot more manageable. You can sort of achieve a similar effect to him by using someone like Yulia or Juggler, but obviously those are like very short lasting, and Emerick just has his aura up all the time. It's a very powerful effect. It also helps that Emerick is okay at combat as well, so he's not just a warm body that stands there and does an aura. He'll do other things as well. For PvP, I'm placing him at B rank because even though his aura can be quite threatening, he doesn't really have that great of striking range. People don't play the kind of games where Emerick would be able to shine anymore. There's actually a fair number of units that can probably survive a hit from Emerick these days. And even though he can extend his range a little bit by using his 3C, he's heavily dependent on having a faction buff in order for that to work. Still, he can have like a moderate range if you get him the support he needs. And you can combine that with Mech Knights as well, which extend his movement even further. But generally speaking, I think Emerick, even though he has some unique things to offer, like it's really hard to get into a position where he would actually be useful. So poor Feraquea, she had like a short stint as some like gimmicky strategies, but it just feels like every time she gets a break, Zilong comes along and tries to nerf her. Her most recent toy, for example, was her ability to convert enemy classes by using her 3C. But then, like, just like a few months after that or whatever, they started releasing bosses that were immune to that effect. So it was like, what was even the point of creating the 3C? That honestly kind of annoyed me because it wasn't even that broken. But in any case, I'm placing Feraquea in tier B for PvP. And for PvE, I'm going to, like, place her in tier A for now. I mean, she doesn't do anything particularly impressive in terms of combat, but sometimes you will see, like, one of those strategies where people use Feraquea to maneuver an enemy out of a certain spot. But in those cases, like, a lot of times you don't even need Feraquea trained to do that. You could use like a level 5 Feraquea or whatever and just like maneuver enemies out of range. Well, maybe not level 5, but whatever level she needs to be for her to learn maneuver. And you know, you've seen me do that as well. And Feraquea is actually kind of unique in that she's one of the few SR units that can act again. She can trigger her act again by like converting her class, and that can be very helpful on certain maps where you need to kill enemies very quickly, because that means she takes 2 turns and you'll do twice as much damage. But yeah, Feraquea like has one unique gimmick that's kind of nice for PvE, but PvP, like, she's too slow to work properly anymore, and she doesn't have the movement to really support it as well. Okay, so Freya, like, this might be a little bit controversial, but I'm actually going to place Freya in S tier for both PvE and PvP for this tier list. I know a lot of people might be going like, well, like, you barely ever see Freya in PvP, so how is she S tier? But me personally, I feel like that has more to do with how the meta is going right now, more so than a problem with Freya herself. I actually think Freya is really good, and, you know, one of the issues is of course that the Origin faction is really weak right now. But I think if we start seeing more strong Origin characters being added to the game, you might start seeing Freya a lot more often as well. Right now, tanks in general are not that popular. I mean, usually you see 2 tank boxes like usual, and, you know, maybe a couple off tanks, but the only pure tanks people run are Hilda and Christiane, who both are, of course, very, very strong. And the only reason you see Landius anymore is because somebody runs a lot of legend characters. So like I said, if they start adding a lot more strong origin characters, I think you're going to start seeing Freya a lot more. But I don't actually feel like Freya herself needs a lot of tweaks here. She even has a built-in immunity to heal block, which can be very, very valuable. It means you can do things like give her a Heart of Gaia, and now she's immune to like ever being heal blocked in any form. Or it also means you can run Bracer without needing to worry about like getting heal blocked as well. And of course, just like Christiane, her 3C means that she can set up an entire team of Origin of like characters without needing to take 2 turns for that. For PvE, I don't think I need to explain too much. Like, Freya is the queen of fixed damage. As long as we continue to see fixed damage stages, or any stage where like fixed damage is important, like Freya is going to reign supreme. You should always build Freya just to make things easier on yourself for those stages. I mean, sure, you can beat them with like Listel or Egbert, or like some other fixed damage character, but Freya is the only one who can just sit there and just barb everything to death. She doesn't have to wait for cooldowns. She doesn't have to like risk herself that much. She's fairly tanky. Just park a healer next to her and you will clear those maps without a problem. And plus, like, you know, Freya is just a good unit in general. Like, if you are newer to the game and you don't have like a lot of good tanks started up yet, Freya not only is a great tank at the beginning of the game, but she gets upgrades to herself at a very steady pace, which just makes her really nice. You know, she's one of the only SR and R tanks that will be able to guard magic. As long as you convert her to her Valkyrie class early on, you will get both a physical and a magical guard. Usually, like, early on in the game, there are almost no tanks that can guard magic. Now they're all over the place, but even among the SRs, when you really look at them, there's actually, like, pretty much only, like, Grenier has, like, a magic guard, like, directly. And after you've played a while and you start unlocking 3Cs, of course you get Freya's 3C, which is also really good. And if you were so inclined, you could upgrade Freya to her SP class later. So like, Freya is like one of the best designed SRs in that she starts off pretty good and then she just continuously gets upgrades as you like progress through the game. And the endpoint for Freya, like I said, maybe she doesn't see a lot of play right now, but I do think we might see more play for Freya in the future, unless they like decide to like screw her over and release just like a completely new Origins buffer that's better than her. But I don't think that's going to happen because Freya is a waifu and a lot of people like her. So next we have Grenier. We're kind of in a weird place with Grenier right now because we know his SP class is coming out, and I say coming out because as I'm recording this, SP Grenier is actually not out on the Chinese server yet. The event to obtain his Heart of Desire is actually currently running on Chinese server, so his data is in the game already, but nobody actually has him yet. Me personally, just looking over his kit, and this is just my initial thoughts basically, is that I think like it is like a pretty significant upgrade for Grenier, and for that reason I'm putting him in A tier for both PvP and PvE. It's a nice upgrade, but it's not enough. I do feel like he's a way better glory tank to choose for PvP now over Leiden, but it's not like Leiden was considered particularly good still. Glory faction is doing pretty good though, so I think Grenier can be pretty good if you decide to play a very strong like glory box. Then yeah, I can see throwing Grenier in there. The big problem with Grenier is that, you know, he's similar to a lot of other tanks. He can't do anything against AoEs, and even worse, he doesn't do anything against assassins either. I mean, all the popular tanks like Hilda, Christiane, and Landius, they all have something that annoys assassins. Grenier doesn't have anything like that. He has a lot of move. He will probably be able to do pretty good damage. He has like that 5-range counter or whatever now, which can be annoying if you are trying to single target him. But, you know, if you were like playing Lucretia versus Grenier or something, you would probably just bring an AoE instead. That being said, you know, it's not like I'm saying he's bad or anything. I think, like I said, if you play a lot of glory characters, I can definitely see him working in a box now, because at least he is going to annoy single target attackers quite a bit. Although there is an RNG factor to it, right? You need to hope that he'll activate his preemptive counter. I think that's a pretty key part of his kit. But if you gear him right, I think you can push him to like something around like 50% first counter rate, which is pretty good. PvE, you guys see me use Grenier quite often, and I don't think that he has really changed that much in this regard. He's still like a good tank to raise, and just like Matthew and Almeda, he gets 6 stars easily, so he's like a pretty high return on investment character. He does rank lower than Matthew and Almeda for the simple fact that For some reason, the devs really hate him and don't run him as a regular bonus character in Secret Realm events, just like Almeda and Matthew. Now, usually for those farm events where you have to farm like 3 or 4 separate items, Grenier will be on there. But like a lot of times, if they only include 2 of them, they will always boot Grenier. And that kind of sucks for him. Next we have Hein, and I'm going to place him in A tier for both PvP and PvE. I think some people feel like Hein has fallen out of PvP a bit because you don't really see him anymore. But I think he can still be pretty good. I mean, the main problem is that there's so much power creep, right? There's so many good units to choose from. So in general, it's like, do you really want to invest in Hein? And if you haven't invested in Hein before, you still need to unlock his SP, which also takes a bunch of resources. But I think overall, Hein is still a pretty good unit to be running, even in PvP. So for that reason, I'm still going to put him in A tier for PvP. Now for PvE, I think he's faring a lot better. Even if you don't SP him, the thing is that people have always complained from day one, actually, that he doesn't have sorceresses and he had to use wizards. That was one of the biggest problems with Hein during the early days of the game. But very soon he's going to get the fairy soldiers, and those are pretty much just as good, if not better, at offense at sorceresses. It really depends on what kind of target you're hitting. But once Hein gets those, even if you never plan on SPing the guy, he is going to be really, really good for PvE stuff, especially for newer players. Like if you're looking for like a mage to fight like Scylla or something, like I can definitely use Hein. I will say that his placement for PvP, I am assuming you have his SP. So if at this point you don't have SP Hein yet, I definitely don't really recommend investing into that SP anymore. And for PvE, like I said, the SP is nice. If you just like Hein, if he's like your favorite character from Langrisser 2 or something, then yeah, go ahead and invest in that. But even his base form can still be really good now because he's going to get the fairy soldiers and that's going to help him out a lot. Imelda is Queen's Whip, and there's really nothing else to say about that, so she goes into A tier. Queen's Whip is just a really overpowered skill. The only thing that really has hurt Imelda over time is just power creep. Really, there's a lot of good enablers and attack buffers now, and of course the recent release of TR's 3C has hurt Imelda especially, I feel like. But Imelda can still be pretty good. +2 to a single unit can sometimes be more valuable than like buffing the entire team. It really depends on what kind of matchup you have. The other downside of Imelda is that she has a hard time multitasking. When she brings Queen's Whip, her healing kit just becomes really, really bare bones and really weak. Now, one upside of Imelda is the fact that, unlike a lot of other healers, like Imelda actually does have like a damage increase, which does make it so that she can do a pretty fair amount of damage as well. But even among the healers that exist right now, like Florentia can also do that because she has the soldier boost. Sissy White can also hit fairly hard. So Imelda's not really unique in that regard anymore. Still, Queen's Whip is good. And of course, it's always worth keeping in mind that Imelda is an SR, and a lot of the other popular boosting units are SSR, so like you might not necessarily have them at 6 stars, but you probably have Imelda at 6 stars, so she's always ready to go. That's always the advantage of SRs, and that extends to Imelda as well. A lot of what I said about Imelda also applies to Iris. Iris also a very good healer and very good support with her teleport, but power creep has given her a hard time. They're just units that are better at boosting and units that are better at healing now. Iris is still good and still worth using if you have her. And this is our second collab character. I didn't talk about it much last time. I put Altina in the C tier for Divine Shard priority, and this might confuse some people, but I'm also going to put Iris in C tier for Divine Shard priority. And the reason for that isn't actually a problem with Iris herself, but it's more the fact that when you 6-star Iris, the improvement in her talent is like laughably small. It's barely any improvement at all. Like you heal slightly more, and yeah, her stats go up too. But when you think about some of the other collab units who might get like really substantive changes from the Divine Shard upgrade, like there's really no reason to be wasting them on Iris. Now, day 1 players already have a 6-star Iris, but I'm talking in the context of if you have a 5-star Iris because you only played the Sakura Wars event once and you were thinking about upgrading her, I would actually discourage you from doing that unless like you use literally none of the other collab SRs, because like I said, the upgrade is like barely noticeable. So if you have a 5-star Iris and you use her a lot and you were thinking about using your Divine Shards to get her to 6 stars, consider maybe raising one of the other characters first. If you literally just do not care about the rest of them, then yeah, go ahead and use them on Iris, but it is not an impressive improvement at all. Okay, so I actually haven't played with Isara very much yet. I've played with her a little bit. She is out on the Chinese server, and my general impression is that Isara is terrible. I don't know what it is with Zalone, like, releasing all these really lackluster freebie units. They don't do it that often anyway, so you would think they would give us something nice. It's like after they gave us Klose and like Olivier and Iris, they were scared of giving us anybody useful anymore. Anyway, my impression of Isara is that she can do multiple roles, but she sucks at all of them. She doesn't tank all that well. I mean, she can take like a physical hit, okay. She can do a few attacks, but she does not have an impressive damage output. She can heal a little bit, but who cares? And she also has like this gimmicky thing where she reduces AoE damage taken by your allies. I mean, I can think of maybe some weirdos like thinking of ways to like make this annoying, but I just don't really see the point of using Isara. And what's more is that her factions are awful. Like, she has strategic masters plus time. Like, that's like one of the worst possible faction combinations you could have. Now, I could be totally wrong on this. Like, you know, Isara hasn't been out that long. I've been wrong on many things before, so maybe I'm completely wrong and somebody will surprise me and Isara is actually OP. But for now, I've played around with her a little bit and I'm really not impressed at all. So plain old Jessica is kind of a unique case among R units. She is one of the only R units here I'm actually going to take out of C tier purgatory, but only for PvE. I mean, I don't think she's going to be useful in PvP at all. Sure, the teleport is nice, but the teleport, like, there's plenty of units that can teleport now, and the R stats just, like, really let these R units down. But for PvE, Jessica does have a couple unique things to offer. As you have seen in some of my clear videos, she is one of the very few mythical SRR characters, so that she can be useful just for that. Obviously, alongside Hein, she's one of the queens of, like, being able to make gold maps very easy for you. But she also actually has a pretty good kit because she has, like, Meteor, which is quite good in PvE because, you know, HP % fixed damage is very strong. Unless the enemy is immune, obviously. If we ever got another RSP, like, I do think Jessica is near the top of the list. Although, like, Leticia is quite likely as well. But Jessica has a really good base kit to work off of, so if we ever got an SP for Jessica, she would actually be quite strong, I think. But again, like I say for pretty much all the R characters, they're just not worth investing in. Jessica is one of the rare exceptions where I can see somebody investing in her to fill a very specific role. So Jessica wins once again. She's everywhere in this game. Kuwabara is a joke. I'm half convinced that they made Kuwabara's kit suck just because they knew he was like kind of the butt of the jokes in the anime, so they decided to do that here as well. Now he does have like one niche as like a meteor strike tank. If you don't have juggler raised, then you don't have a lot of choices here. And Kuwabara actually does okay because his talent can be surprisingly strong. But his kit is just kind of all over the place. Like, they tried to make him kind of offensive and kind of defensive at the same time, and he just kind of sucks at both. So yeah, unless you are doing a meteor strike challenge and you really need a tank, you know, I guess at least Kuwabara has sort of a niche in PvE in that sense. Some characters don't even have that. Keith is bad even for the R characters. His role doesn't even make sense. Like, he's a tanky flyer unit that doesn't have a tanking skill. They also gave him Aqua Blast because Zalone really hates him, I guess. And yes, I know everybody's seen that meme where the guy used like Keith with Melania. And I'm not going to deny that doing that sort of thing can be fun to screw around with. And I enjoy doing that too. But at the end of the day, you're basically dedicating 2 entire unit turns to just make Keith do something he should have been able to do on his own. Next we have Kirikaze, who's pretty easy to tier. He's pretty much useless in PvP nowadays. He used to have an interesting gimmick in that he was an infantry that could pierce guard, and he had samurai to take advantage with that. But he's way too slow now, like there's just no way he's gonna do anything in PvP. He does a lot better in PvE though, like he's still a really great choice for Jormungandr if you are newer to the game and you don't have a lot of units for that yet. He's really great at killing the Thunder Dragon. Most people are not going to have Lewin like SP'd up by then, so you know, Kirikaze is just a really good choice all around. You know, he gets buffed by Freya, who is a great SR tank. He has Flash and Air Slash, which are both very good skills for PvE because of their low cooldown. He heals himself, which is always nice, and his 3C even gave him a bit of tankiness. So yeah, Kirikaze not doing so hot in PvP, but at least he's still a really solid unit in PvE. So he's aged better than, well, we'll see. There's a couple units that just did not age well in my opinion. Speaking of which, we're talking about Klose now. I mean, Klose, I would say she hasn't aged well, but she is still good because her starting point was like a really, really meta unit. Like, she was in almost every box. She was that good. These days, I think I would classify her as a B tier for PvP as far as this list is concerned. She's a good enough healer for PvP, but she just can't really keep up with the power creep that's been happening. She actually is still arguably the most powerful dispelling healer in the game. And that should tell you something about how useful dispels are, even if that being the case, she's still not really that good for PvP. For PvE, she's still great. She still heals a lot. She is one of the few legend faction healers, and she's available as an SR. Unfortunately, Trails in the Sky hasn't been rerun for a long time, although maybe we'll see it again in the future. But yeah, if you don't have Klose yet, then obviously like that's not very useful for you. If you have a 5-star Klose, I would classify her as a B tier for Divine Shard priority, as far as this list is concerned. In the past, I would have put her in A tier, because that extra turn of immunity was like really, really strong. But now I don't think sharding her up just for that extra turn of immunity is anything other than a luxury. So yeah, Klose didn't age that well, but her starting point was really high, so she's still pretty good, even after all that. Laird, again, our character, not really worth investing in. The only reason you should be raising Laird is to do like that one Twisted Fate challenge where you need to use Laird alongside Leon or whatever. Aside from that, I don't think it's worth raising Laird at all. Lance has been a joke since day one, and they haven't done much to change that. Sure, there was a short bit of time where people tried to use him as a Landius killer, but that was so easy to disrupt just by running into the wrong kind of Landius. Now, I know some people might dispute me placing him in C tier for both PvE and PvP, because like some people might argue, oh wait, he can be kind of good in PvE because he has an Empire faction buff. So sure, you see me use him, and that's only because I do self-imposed challenges where I try not to use SSRs if I can. And if you're one of those players like who does self-imposed challenges and you want to do a no-pull account or something weird like that, then yeah, Lance can be good there, but that's only because you have no other option. Empire especially, because we know Empire right now is still the only faction that has 4 faction buffs. So even if you needed a faction buff, like I seriously doubt there is any player that pulls for characters that doesn't have at least one of the 3 Empire faction buff characters at least slightly built, because all 3 of them are good. Bernhard is great, Leon is still pretty good, and of course the big one, Rosenseal. Almost everybody should be raising Rosenseal. So even without considering the fact that Lance is a terrible unit, he can't even offer the one thing, which is his faction buff that isn't disrupted by more units than any other faction buff SR there is in the game. And I wish Lance was better, because Lance is a really important character in the series, right? He was like Layden's main rival, and he's like the original rival of the Langrisser games, so you would think they would treat him a bit nicer, but in general, Zalon hasn't been terribly nice to Langrisser 1 characters, and unfortunately Lance is just another casualty of that. There is a slight bit of hope that they might give him an SP in the future, but wow, like, his base kit is really not that great. His 3C isn't that great either, although like, as we saw with like Altamiller's SP, sometimes they add effects onto the new skills that will be modified by the 3C. So yeah, there's still hope for Lance if he gets an SP, but yeah, for now, like, I think if Lance didn't have that faction buff to give him that little bit of usage, I think he would be the worst SR in the game. Lester, Lester is a hero of a lot of Day 1 players because he was there to save us from a lot of timeless trial maps by pulling in enemies and letting us kill them one at a time. And you know what, like, I would say like newer players can still use that strat if they're trying to like push content very quickly. But the thing is that you don't need to actually raise Lester to do that. Like, Lester can be like level 10 or something and he'll still do his job just fine. But that being said, that utility alone I think places him in like A tier for PvE. He does have a unique utility, and he's still useful for that if you really need to climb Timeless Trial very quickly. It's not as useful as it used to be because like I think newer accounts can progress way faster than we could for Day 1 players. But that doesn't make chain hook strats less useful, it just makes it useful for a shorter amount of time, I think. Leticia is well known as one of the few R characters that is actually usable. in PvP especially. But there's plenty of boosters nowadays, so I think even with that, she only gets a B tier for PvP. For PvE, like, she is not that good at all. The boosting effect, like, it can be useful on some maps, I think, but like, I just think in general, like, you're not going to be using Leticia. But like I said with Jessica, like, there is a pretty good chance that if I do another RSP, it will be Leticia, and she has a decent enough kit to work off of, so I guess we'll see. Okay, Lewin. So we all know Lewin's great at PvP now. Obviously, that requires him to be in his SP class, but I don't think that should really discount him from being placed in S tier here for PvP. As for PvE, like, even if you don't SP him, he's actually quite good for PvE. He's pretty well known by Day 1 players and even players beyond that as being one of the best, like, Thunder Dragon fighters. He does run into a lot of trouble when you get to Nightmare difficulty for Thunder Dragon, I think, because the stats get so high and the R character stats just kind of let him down. Generally speaking, I think if you are going to keep Lewin as an R character, Kirikaze would often be better than him still, and they have similar factions anyway. I will say that, like, Lewin with his exclusive does get buffed by both Glory and Origin, so even as just an R character, he does have, like, some new tools at his disposal. Unfortunately, one of the problems with exclusives giving you a new faction is that you aren't counted as being part of that faction. So if you're doing like a Glory challenge, you can't actually use Lewin, even though he gets buffed by Legion of Glory faction buffs, because he will not be counted as a Legion of Glory unit. That might seem like a minor thing, but for the purposes of PvE, like, if we're trying to think of what unique roles someone can offer, I do think that's a consideration. All that being said, though, Lewin is still pretty decent for PvE, so I'm just going to place him in A tier here. So Liffany, like, my problem with Liffany is that a lot of times she just seems like a worse Egbert in most cases. She can do acid burns, but so can Egbert. She can do a lot of fixed damage, but so can Egbert. Egbert also offers teleports. Pretty much the only thing that Liffany does is that she's in the Princess faction and the Origin faction, so they have different factions, which is nice. So, like, you can have a different unit for different faction teams. And Liffany has aim, which can be useful sometimes, but Egbert with his teleport has much higher reach now. So Liffany is okay, but I think, like, Egbert just generally outclasses her in every way. But like I said, like, she does have unique factions. They have separate factions, so you can raise both of them and it'll be fine. And Liffany can be good in Jormungandr for newer players as well. So she's, I make it sound like she's bad or something, but she's fine. And okay, next we have Liza, and Liza, I haven't talked about her very much on this channel yet, and most people probably don't have a lot of experience with her, but I am tentatively putting her in B rank for PvP, and I'm actually going to place her all the way in S rank for PvE. So let me try to explain why I am doing this. So for PvP, like, yeah, Liza has some unique skills, but she has very low movement. She doesn't really have, she has like a lot of terrain restrictions, which can be a really big problem. So in general, she just can't really fit that well in PvP boxes nowadays, I think. She does have potential because she doesn't have a unique equipment yet, but I kind of felt the same way about Melania when she first came out, and like Melania just kind of stayed around the same level as they gave more stuff to her. And I'm afraid that might be the same thing that happens to Liza down the line. So I gave her S rank in PvE on this list. So I'm placing her there for two reasons, and they're not the ones you're thinking of. First is that she's a hybrid character, but she's set up in such a way so that you can kind of let her fill multiple roles with that same skill loadout, which is something that I think a lot of units have trouble with. Like if you go back to Chris, like one of the problems with her is that oftentimes if you use her as a support unit, she is really bad at DPSing. Liza doesn't have that problem as much. She can kind of bring all of the kit she wants at once, and a lot of it is tied to like what mode she's in from her talent. The second reason is the bigger one, I feel like, and in this case it's the fact that she is a meteor strike healer. There has never been a meteor strike character that has a direct heal spell. They have had a lot of indirect heals, like Zerados faction buff heals, Juggler can heal the party, and a lot of the meteor strike characters can just like have some kind of self heal. But I think having a character like this that can just like do a direct heal is going to be very useful in some cases. At the very least, it's going to make meteor strike challenges a little bit easier, or like a little bit more open So yeah, maybe I'll talk about Liza a little bit more in the future, but for now, you know, the short of it is that I think Liza is like a lot of fun to play around with, and she even offers something completely unique, which was not something that Oliver or Melania did. So as a new freebie, I think she's like definitely one of the better freebies we've gotten. Next is Melania, and Melania is kind of a weird character in that she does offer a lot of very unique things, but she's actually not that useful when you sit down and actually use her. Obviously for PvP, I think she's useless because her talent requires your enemy to target Melania specifically, which is not going to happen. For PvE, like, it's a little bit easier to line it up so that she usually takes the hit, and then the tank comes and guards her. And her 3C has helped along that a little bit as well, because now she can give a bonus that like isn't completely just tied to her. So I'm still going to give her like an okay rank for PvE. I'm going to place her in A tier here. She can be good, but I think a lot of times I feel like you know, a lot of the best PvE healers, like even among SRs, like, you know, like Sophia, are still better than her. And it doesn't help that she has very, very weak AoE healing potential. Again, her 3C helped out with that a little bit. But in general, like I feel like the few unique things she does are counterbalanced pretty heavily by the fact that she has, like, she's missing a lot of the basic skills that you want a healer to have a lot of the time. But you know what, like, I do give brownie points on this list for like unique abilities, so I'm still gonna give Melania a decent rank for PvE. But yeah, for PvP, like, this one's known from day one that, you know, she wasn't that useful because it requires your opponent to purposefully attack Melania while she's under guard, which is probably not going to happen. So Narm is like well known as one of the queens of PvE. I think she easily gets an S ranking for PvE stuff, but I would place her at around like A tier for PvP. This might surprise some people because like you don't see Narm very often in PvP. Now I'm thinking about like SP Narm here. So SP Narm, like, even though you don't see her that often, and that's probably just because of power creep, but I don't think SP Narm is actually that bad for PvP. Like, she has pretty good range. She has sprints, so she can enable a team. You know, her skills are okay. Like, they're a little bit too conditional. That's really the big problem with them. But all things considered, like, I think there are way worse SRs you would be putting into your box when compared to Narm. The big problem, I feel like, is that a lot of times when a player is stuck using SRs, that means that they are probably a newer player and they should probably be playing AoE. And of course, Narm is no good for that. But that being said, like, Narm does have at least a couple tools that she can bring to the table for PvP. So I'm still going to give her a better ranking than a lot of the B tier characters here. Oliver, just like Melania, like, he was a character that I was kind of interested in when he first came out because he did have a couple of unique things going for him. But he just got worse and worse over time, and the stuff they released for him just was not impressive at all. And he was left off worse than Melania because now, aside from being bad in PvP, I mean, he had a short stint where he was kind of useful. But even for PvE, like there's very little reason to use the guy, and his talent makes him very awkward to use as well. He is otherwise a pretty generic assassin character. He does have base 5 move and access to move again, which are both really nice things to have, but they're not quite enough to make him that great. Olivier, just like a lot of our collab units, has fallen behind for PvP. He used to be really good because he was a booster, he healed a little bit, and like his talent was good as well. He was well known for being good in PvE as well, mostly for Sleipnir. He is not involved in like the top scores for Sleipnir anymore, I don't think. But he's still really good, especially like a lot of players are not going to have the time or the resources to shard a lot of the best characters for Sleipnir or any of the other Ancient Beckoning bosses, and Olivier is really nice and he's going to last you a long time. So for that reason, like, I'm actually for the Divine Shard priority, I'm actually going to put him at A tier. Like, if you have a 5-star Olivier and you don't have a very strong Sleipnir team, I don't think it's really a bad idea to shard up Olivier at all. The extra range on the damage reduction is actually really, really huge when you're doing Sleipnir. So yeah, if you've been struggling with Sleipnir and, you know, you use Olivier, then definitely I think he's worth investing in. So next there's Parn. So you guys see me use Parn quite a bit in challenges clear sometimes, so I'm probably a little bit biased. But I'm going to place Parn in B tier for PvP, and that's pretty borderline for him. He's really not that usable in PvP at all. I'm placing him in A tier for PvE because he is actually a really strong unit when he gets to 6 stars, but if you don't get him to 6 stars, he's just like okay. But I think that fits the description I have here, which is that he's a good pick if you need a solid DPS. Parn's always been pretty good at that. But because of that, like, he doesn't really offer anything specifically unique, I feel like. So that's why I'm also going to put him into B tier for Divine Shard priority. Like, there's really no big reason to be sharding him unless you just really like Parn. I think Parn is good, but that's just like, it's a very like average kind of good, if that makes sense. There's a lot of units in this game. There's a lot of DPS to choose from. And there's very little reason to be going for Parn over the other ones, especially given how much investment you need to put into him compared to some of the other SRs. Now, if you don't have a lot of other characters to be using the Divine Shards on, then you might be able to raise Parn up, and you can play around with him a little bit. He does do pretty well in PvE sometimes. Next is Pierre. Once again, our character. I don't think he's that good. For a while, people did use Pierre to be like really annoying in PvP because he can be very, very tanky. And just like Lester, he also has Chain Hook. But Lester was generally better at that job because Lester had like certain skills that he could use that Pierre did not have. Pierre was basically like a more PvP-oriented version of Lester, which, like I said, some people did use Pierre with success. But that's just not possible anymore, so I don't think there's any reason to be investing into Pierre anymore. Pirotess is pretty bad. She's a pretty generic assassin at this point. And it took her having to get her 3C to get her to that level, so that should really tell you something about how she was before that. She might do okay in some tank push games if you need like an assassin to kill somebody. But she offers basically nothing unique. She does have an archer class, so you can like use her assassin skills on her archer class if you're so inclined, but I don't think that's really something that's that useful. Especially now that SP Narm exists, she would be able to do that specific niche better than Pirotess can. Rohga. Again, our unit. I know Rohga has a lot of fans from people who played Langrisser 2, but yeah, Rohga's no good. Scott, like, once again, our unit, not that useful. What I will say about Scott is that he's a little bit more interesting than the typical R unit because his kit is definitely more cohesive than some of the other R characters. He's a tanky cavalry. He actually gets a guard skill, and he is in the Glory faction, which can be kind of useful because Glory is like a good beginner faction. But the thing is like Glory, they have Grenier, and that's their faction buffer. For the SRs, so like you already have a tank. Why would you need Scott around? Now potentially Scott might be able to tank Hugin and Moonin better than Grenier, but I seriously doubt it. Like Scott has the 30% from his talent, and he can get Gold Knights later on. Gold Knights are going to be very tanky as well, but Grenier not only has Bolt Rangers. If you really want a lot of damage reduction, he also has Iron Helmet, which can also help him to survive. So I think it's kind of a wash in that sense. So there's really no reason to raise Scott just for that one specific thing. Scott does have Mass Attack, I believe, which is also useful in Hugin and Moonin. So yeah, he does have a couple interesting toys to play around with here and there, but there's just no reason to be raising him when you have much better units to be focusing on, especially with Glory, right? Because Glory has so many strong SR units there. Strangely enough, if Scott actually had different factions, maybe he would be a little bit more useful. Serena is like one of the most tragic SRs in this game. Like she just like the instant she was added, like I think most of the community's reaction to her was basically like, why would I use her over Landius or Vargas or whatever? And it's like some people tried to make her work because she did have some offensive potential, which was kind of unique, and it's like her kit didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And then so they released Serena's 3C, which was basically like a power stab, which is something she should have had in the first place. And then when you compare that to like what Vargas got, and that was a nail in the coffin, I think Serena can still sort of be like this weird off tank, but there's just no reason to ever run that sort of thing nowadays. And of course Serena is a legend tank, That's one of her last niches, I think. Not everybody is going to be raising Landius, especially among newer players, considering some of the really OP tanks that are around right now. So I can see a newer player who doesn't raise Landius and might end up using Serena on like a legend challenge because of that, but that's a pretty narrow usage. Shibaraku is such a weird case, because you would think like out of all the collab SR characters they would make like the cute waifu characters the really OP ones, but here comes Shibaraku. He's just like this funny looking hippo looking guy, and it's just like he's probably the best collab SR we've gotten in a long time. He's not some OP character, but he has so many things in his kit that make him pretty unique and fun to play around with. First of all, he has, like, if you shard him up to 6 stars, he does have 2 revives, which is pretty strong. There's really not that many SR characters who have a revive at all, and Shibaraku has 2 of them. Shibaraku has pretty good skills. He has 2 classes, and one of them has Terrain Master with 4 movements. It's a Lancer DPS, which is not super common. They keep giving Shibaraku like really, really good troop choices, so he has a lot of variety on that front. And for PvP, like, maybe you're not going to see him in Apex, but like one thing he is good at is that he can actually be very good in auto chess mode, or like the Magic Towers mode, because in that mode, units that can do an attack and then an AoE after that are usually really good. Units that can revive can be a very big nuisance, and Shibaraku has all of that, so he actually does pretty good in Magic Towers mode. So overall, like, Shibaraku, like, he's not the best unit or anything, but he does have a lot of unique skills to him, and his kit comes together in a cohesive way so that he actually has something to offer. And that's more than you can say about a lot of the recent collab SRs like Isara or Toma or Altina. So yeah, I'm placing Shibaraku B rank for PvP, A rank for PvE. He's a pretty solid unit. And for shards, I'm going to place him in B. Like, I think you can shard him if you like him, but he's not like some super important character to shard. Silver Wolf, another casualty of power creep. When the game first launched, Silver Wolf was pretty good. He was pretty an archetypal assassin. Nowadays, like, there's like units move way too far. Silver Wolf can't keep up with them at all. And PvE wise, like, assassins were not considered terribly good near the beginning of the game. And even though they've added some assassins since then who are doing better at PvE, like, Silver Wolf is definitely not one of the ones that is helpful there. You can run Silver Wolf as an archer and maybe kill some flyers with him, and that's about all I can think of. And sure, like, Silver Wolf can steal buffs, which is it's pretty strong sometimes, but if you wanted to steal buffs, you would probably use Oliver. I think he's better at that role, and Oliver is not even that good, so I think that should say it all right there. Sonya's still really strong, like, for PvE at least. Like, if you really need something dead and you don't have a lot of characters to choose from, like, Sonya with her 3C can still do a ton of damage. The big problem here is that Sonya needs, like, really, really good enchants to really pump the damage of that 3C up, because she's one of those units that double dips into attack and intelligence, so you need some really crazy enchants on her, and you need to have her exclusive in order to do the most damage out of that thing. For PvP, like, tanks are way too tanky these days, and that is a really big problem for Sonya. But it's still, like, she has okay striking distance, she has ninjutsu, and she can still hit the tanks fairly hard, and I'm pretty sure she can hit Christiane pretty hard as well, especially if she's running her infantry class like she usually does. So, Sonya's okay. Like, she's made it out better than a lot of other SR characters, I feel like. Sophia, I think, needs no introduction. Sophia easily makes it into S tier for PvE stuff. Universal faction buff, basically. Rewind can be very important for some fights. Even for PvP, like, even though you don't see her around as much anymore, I think she can still be really good. That defense buff can be very, very strong. Rewind, again, like, even in PvP, it's still good. Yeah, there's really no reason a newer player should not be raising Sophia. Like, that's really all I have to say about it. So I've said this before in the past, but I think Toma is, like, on paper, he looks good. He has a lot of attack, and he has decent skills. And the armor, it can be very useful as well, but like he has such bad factions, there's really no reason to be using him over Narm. The only impressive thing about Toma is the fact that they got like a 90-year-old man to come out of retirement just to voice the guy again. And it's amazing to hear his original voice actor try to voice a character that's like an eighth of his age. That guy put more effort into voicing this character than Zalone did into designing his kit. So next we have Vargas. I mean, if you guys seen me do like my clears with SRs, you know I sing the praises of Vargas all the time. You know, Vargas has like some of the biggest defense in the game. He can actually do a lot of damage on offense, like even in PvE. And of course his 3C not only makes him immune to heal block, but he can't get his guard range dispelled, which is very strong. And he gets to revive like an extra 2 times, which just makes him very nice for those achievements where you want to like not have anybody die. All that being said, like even though Vargas is very good at tanking, like I don't think he's really necessary in any way. So for that reason, like I'm still gonna only put him in A tier for PvE stuff. So like he's not like a must build or anything. It's just that if you build him, you're gonna make your life a lot easier on a lot of maps. Alright, we're finally almost done here, guys. Final one, Varna, and quite a character to finish off on because Varna is the queen of SRs. I pretty like without hesitation place her into S tier for both PvP and PvE. Varna is just so good. I think Varna is arguably the best SR in the game. I mean, in an overall sense. And the thing about it is that Varna actually hasn't changed that much from where she was when the game first started. Sure, she's gotten her exclusive, which is like, okay, it makes her 1,000 arrows slightly bigger some of the time. Like, that is nice. And her 3C is basically just another 1,000 arrows. And the thing is, like, both of these things are nice, but neither one of them actually fundamentally changed Varna that much. She's pretty much still the same character as she was when she was first released on day 1. Even right now, like after all the power creep, like Varna is still like a legitimate threat in PvP. Like not just because of her being able to do quite a bit of like AoE damage herself, and she like dispels the buff, which is very annoying. But also because of the support she offers to an AoE team. Like obviously she powers up their AoE damage, and she can cast mass attack, so she's basically like having an attack buff plus a faction buff. And you know, you can stack her AoE talent buff even with a faction buff, so she can just make them even stronger. Varna doesn't even need to be ran in like some kind of weird obscure box. Like if you run AoEs, then Varna is worth putting in your box. If you are a newer player trying to get into PvP as well, like Varna is basically like you have to have her in your box. If you're newer to the game, then your training grounds isn't going to be as strong, so you're going to be playing AoE, and there's no reason you shouldn't have Varna in your box. Even when she's not doing damage, the fact that she has mass attack is obviously a really big deal because it means you can charge head first into a situation where you might have to take a lot of debuffs, and mass attack makes you, obviously it gives you the attack buff, but it makes you immune to attack down, it makes you immune to silence, which are 2 of the most important things you could have on an AoE team. So yeah, like Varna is she just has a really good kit for her role, and that's why they didn't give her anything particularly unique for her special equipment or her 3C, because she really didn't need to move much from where she was to still be useful. Now as for PvE, I think a lot of people already know, you know, she's very important for a lot of Ancient Beckoning fights. She is not only like one of the best DPS for Fenrir until you get like some like crazy SSR setups. She is also like one of the few characters to be run off faction in one of the Ancient Beckoning fights, which of course is Hugin and Moonin. She is very good there because she can do mass attack plus defense support L. She's also very useful for fighting level 70 Leviar if you don't have another good like AoE user. The only reason you don't see Varna very much in a lot of PvE clears is that she's not like particularly good for like generalized PvE clears, like beating story missions or beating time rifts. Sometimes she's not as good at doing that. But even with those limitations, like it's not like she's terrible at that either, right? So like even with all those limitations, like Varna is just, you pretty much have to build her. Like there's no reason to not build her, no matter what faction you like playing. So that's why I say Varna is pretty much the queen of SRs. A lot of the other SRs, like, they go up and down, and sometimes they get a new toy, but Varda has been holding pretty steady, and she's always been useful, and she's always been good at her job. So there you go, that's all 47 SR and R characters ranked by myself. I'm sure I contradicted myself in some way across this entire video, but overall I think I spread out the units fairly well across the tiers. And as I expected, I ended up actually not placing anybody in the S tier for the Divine Shard priority, because I don't think there's any of the SR collab units yet where it's like you have to shard them. So I think it's fine to leave that one blank. Anyway, if you guys have any thoughts, you want to tell me I'm completely wrong, or you just want to talk about some SR character you like, please comment below and like my horrible clickbait video. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you guys next time.